The torches are already burning when the Viking scouts reach the ridge. Below them, a fortress that wasn't there 6 months ago. Walls, ditches, a garrison, and behind all of it, a woman. You'll see the moment Viking leaders in York sent messengers begging for terms before she even marched. You'll find out that she recaptured a major Viking city in less than a single campaigning season. And you'll learn why the woman who nearly unified England was quietly erased from the story her own family told. Her name was Æthelflæd, daughter of Alfred the Great, sister of King Edward, lady of the Mercians, and the most dangerous military mind in early medieval Britain. Here's what I keep coming back to. We remember Alfred because he held on. We remember him because he didn't lose. But holding on isn't the same as winning. Winning came later, and it came from her. To understand Æthelflæd, you need to understand what England looked like in the 880s. It wasn't England yet. Not really. The Vikings, the Danes specifically, controlled a vast swath of the north and east. The Danelaw. Their own laws, their own lords, their own cities, built over the bones of Anglo-Saxon ones. Alfred had fought them to a standstill. That was genuinely remarkable. But the Danelaw still existed. Derby was Danish, Leicester was Danish, York was Danish. The map was still broken. Æthelflæd was born into that broken map, probably around 870. She grew up watching her father govern under permanent military pressure. She learned what it meant to hold power when your enemies were one bad harvest away from overrunning you. And then, around 886, she was married. Her husband was Æthelred, the lord of the Mercians, Alfred's ally. Not a king, but close enough. This is the part history books usually skim. They call it a political marriage and move on. But I think it was her education. Mercia was the Middle Kingdom, bordered the Danelaw on the east, the Welsh kingdoms on the west, Alfred's Wessex to the south. To govern Mercia was to be a permanent strategic problem, and Æthelflæd governed it. Even before Æthelred got sick, which he did progressively through the 900s, the sources suggest she was deeply involved in administration, in diplomacy, in defense. She was learning the board. Think of early medieval England as a fortress under construction. Alfred poured the foundations. Æthelred, her husband, helped raise the first walls. But the fortress wasn't finished when Alfred died in 899, or when Æthelred died in 911. It still had gaps, and the Danes knew exactly where they were. When Æthelflæd became ruler of Mercia, sole ruler in her own name, Lady of the Mercians, she didn't grieve publicly for long. She started building. The burh system. This is what makes her campaigns so fascinating to me. Her father had pioneered it. Fortified towns, strategically placed, designed to be both refugees and forward bases. Æthelflæd took the concept and industrialized it. In a roughly 10-year span, she commissioned burhs at Tamworth, Stafford, Warwick, Runcorn, and others. Each one was calculated, not just defensively, but offensively. Each fortress was a chess piece moved forward on the board. She wasn't reacting to Viking raids anymore. She was boxing them in. Here's a question I want you to sit with for a moment. How do you recapture a city that's been under Viking control for decades? Derby had Danish lords, Danish settlers, Danish defenses. It wasn't just a military target, it was a community, heavily armed and not interested in leaving. In 917, Æthelflæd marched on Derby. She took it. The sources are brief, frustratingly brief, but they're clear. She captured it by force in a single campaign season. 4 of her thanes were killed fighting through the gates, which tells you it was not bloodless, but she took it. This is the part I find genuinely stunning. Leicester fell next, and it barely fought back. Some historians argue the city essentially submitted, that her reputation and the network of fortresses she'd built around the Danelaw's edges had made resistance feel futile. She had changed the psychology of the conflict. A woman commanding armies in the early 10th century was already remarkable. A woman whose army's enemies chose not to fight. That's something else entirely. And then York, the great Viking city, the jewel of the Danelaw, the place Alfred had never come close to. This is the moment I mentioned at the top, and it's the one that stops me every time. Viking leaders in York, some sources suggest, sent messengers to Æthelflæd offering submission before she marched, before she even mobilized. They looked at the board she had constructed over a decade and decided the game was already over. She didn't get to collect. In June 918, Æthelflæd died at Tamworth. The cause isn't recorded. She was probably in her late 40s. York was still technically free. The submission hadn't been formalized. Her daughter Elfwin briefly succeeded her and was removed within months by her uncle Edward, who folded Mercia into Wessex and took the credit. That's not conspiracy. That's just how power worked. But it does mean that the woman who broke the Danelaw open was absorbed into her brother's story before the ink was dry. Here's the central unfairness, and I'm not going to soften it. The Alfred built England narrative is dominant for a reason. Alfred was a great king, and he wrote things down, or had things written down in ways that survived. At Derby, Leicester, the network of fortresses that strangled the Danelaw's supply lines, the Welsh alliances, the dealings with Scottish lords to pressure the Danes from the north, the psychological surrender of York before a single Mercian soldier moved. That's not Alfred's legacy. That's the fortress he never finished, completed by his daughter while his son was still finding his footing. The Mercian Register, a chronicle that survives only in fragments, possibly maintained by people close to Æthelflæd's court, records her campaigns with unusual directness for the period. It doesn't explain her. It doesn't justify her. It just records what she did. Derby, Leicester, the burhs, the alliances. As if it were obvious that a woman was doing this. Maybe, in Mercia, it was. Come back to the fortress metaphor one last time. England, the unified kingdom, was built in pieces by multiple people over multiple generations. Alfred held the southern wall. Æthelred helped anchor the middle. But Æthelflæd advanced the line. She pushed the perimeter forward, fortress by fortress, city by city, until the Danelaw was half the size it had been. Her brother crossed the finish line. She built the track. I'll leave you with this. In 918, the same year she died, Æthelflæd was recognized as Lady of the Mercians by the kings of the Scots, the Strathclyde Britons, and some Welsh rulers. Political acknowledgement from multiple kingdoms simultaneously. That kind of recognition doesn't come from paperwork. It comes from a decade of watching someone operate and deciding this person is the real power in the middle of Britain. She was 48 years old. She had never lost a campaign. And we spent 1,000 years forgetting her name. Subscribe. There are more files where this one came from.